Yeah, and then this meeting.
Oh, okay. And it just goes on the
By itself.
by itself.
Open loud. Open both. First source. Good so far. Is this an Indiana thing, or is this just the US that doesn't get fall groups? And do other colleges in the US get treated in Indiana get fall groups? I don't know.
I'll do that.
I'm pretty sure. And that's green, since we don't go Fridays, we don't.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's kind of, a lot of like terms. The way they do it is, they do 4 days of time, like, put in terms, and usually they're not until like 8 to 10. So you don't have to last those 4 days.
Okay, so let's start. Morning. Start to meditate. Okay, we start with a minute, please. One. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. So you do it home? Try. Huh?
I haven't been in the past week.
You do?
Maybe once every 2 days. I'm trying to do it once every day.
You do it.
A little bit.
Try, get try.
I'm trying to do it, but
It's more, instead of daily as a habit, it's more like reactionary when I'm stressing out or something.
Okay.
So I should probably work on the daily habit thing more.
Okay.
But I tend to try to meditate when I'm getting ready to freak out.
Okay.
Which is almost daily.
So it's better you do every day so that you can be ready.
And not have to freak out.
Yeah, otherwise, when you wait for that moment, maybe too late.
Yeah, that's
Right.
a good thing to consider.
So there's analogy said that you have to dig the
the well to get the water before you thirsty. You understand that?
Yeah.
When you thirsty, it's too late. Anyway. All right. So today we talk about the parents and children, how we use mindfulness in parent-children relationship, and it's just a lot of terminology that I wrote on the board we studied. Okay, so let us start with. You'd like to do something? Which number?
I had number 3.
Okay, go ahead. What's that?
It was how to describe mindfulness to children and adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
And I have it on my phone, so I'm just gonna pull it up. But initially, I was interested in this topic because a few semesters ago, I did some research on children's technology now or relationship with technology now, which is, as we all know, pretty intense. You always see kids with their phones, blah, blah, blah. But it kind of ties into this because I feel like kids now are very goal-minded, they're very competitive, and I think it starts really with the school system, to be honest. I mean, there's all this emphasis on test taking, and I think it would be really, really, I think we talked about this before, a nice thing to have a mindfulness class like this implemented into public schools, or even, I don't know what ages exactly, but somewhere in there where they can start learning these tools early on and prepare for their future like we are doing now. But Rebecca's like, yes.
They really have a club at the school.
Do they? See, they had nothing like this when I was growing up. This is all new.
Is your talk too late for the K-12 student?
Do I want to do it?
No. I mean that when you go to Thich, next few years from now, you may create the curriculum, mindfulness curriculum.
Oh yeah, I can.
Okay, guess your
I
talk.
brought that up.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
But from what I read, it's just as important for the teacher or the coach to be mindful, obviously, as it is for the student or the child. So I think that what I said was when it works properly, both the teacher and the pupil gain some new insight and awareness. So it's important for the teacher or parent to have a good understanding of mindfulness to begin with, obviously. And they have to sort of coach with compassion, which means sort of creating a safe, calm, non-judgmental environment for the child or the pupil to learn in, which makes sense, a reassuring environment. And from another thing that I read, they are doing, there is an 8-week program in schools, the Mindfulness in Schools project, which has 8 steps, and I'm assuming that's for each week. But it's direct attention, turn towards calm, deal with worry, be here now, move mindfully, step back, befriend the difficult, which I thought was interesting, and then where now. And I have there's a couple of quotes I read from kids that have been through this, and one said, mindfulness has helped me to concentrate easily, and that was from a 6-year-old. And then another is, mindfulness has helped me reduce headaches, concentrate before exams, and perform better in football, and that was from a 13-year-old. So I mean, that's a 7-year gap where these kids are getting some really good experience. And then of course the benefits from teaching mindfulness to children is just a huge list. Higher self-belief, reduce stress, helps focus, improve memory, more creative, improves sleeping, concentration, empathy, helps them manage their anger, all these great things. But yeah, I mean, I think I would really, I would have enjoyed having a class like this when I was younger. So I hope that it's something that's implemented into schools somehow.
Yeah, thank you. About, nowadays it's like a trend. It's happening everywhere, especially in this country. That the children are addicted with games. Right? How could you help them to get out the RAM.
You mean like video games or?
Video games, all kind of games there. Instead of focuses on studying,
Right.
so they disconnect themselves, right, from reality. And so how could they use implement mindfulness to help them to get out that illusion?
You might be able to, when they're actually doing the training, it might be possible to make some of the techniques more like activities, not necessarily games, but like the raisin technique or whatever. Have it maybe more interactive for them while they're doing the training. But I guess in their own home, I guess the idea would be that they learn not to need the distraction as much. So maybe if they go through like an 8-week training, maybe it would eventually have their reliance on video games increase. But I think it would be necessary to have some kind of, because kids do need stimulation of some kind, so maybe some kind of interactive way of teaching meditation to them that's not super, not necessarily boring.
Yeah. Even mature people like us, sometimes we like to do something in our spare time. We cannot sit still. Not talking about the children. They have to do something. In the past, children went out the field to play soccer, football, and so forth. Now they stay in the corner and punch. Alright, so yes.
I was going to respond too, because I think that there are, we have seen a lot of benefits to certain video games, and I think that the amount of time we spend on them is not necessarily good, but I think that since one of the things we talk about is, acceptance and awareness, maybe being aware of the value of whatever they're getting from the video game, like maybe it's helping them with math or history, like there are some video games that are stimulating for education purposes, all these things. But then teaching them how to balance that with, and find the value in other things as well, in reality, and knowing the difference.
I have a practical question. I have a grandson, and he thinks he's being punished if you take the iPad away from him. There's no room to squeeze anything in. And I don't know how to deal with that. I'm not the parent, but I don't know.
How is it?
That's great.
So what's your question again?
They're learning, so
How?
I don't know how to help him. He's always on his video game on the iPad, unless he's doing homework. And I'm not the parent, but I'd like to encourage him to learn.
I think he might not feel like he's being punished if when you take away the iPad, you replace it with something else that he enjoys.
That's what I was thinking, like try a new activity.
Yeah, like.
Hey, we're going roller skating.
Yeah,
You
or.
can't take the iPad, sorry.
Or I'm just going to give you some positive feedback when, so he knows that he's not being punished, like, oh, as soon as you take away the iPad and you notice that he's doing something positive, or you notice he's sitting still or something, something really small like that, just pointing that out to him, that might help him realize that he's not in a bad place when the friends aren't there.
I have a boy who lived with me last school year, and he got 4.0s because we don't have any internet service up there for them. Of course, I have my satellite. It's not my selfish, but I do work. But for them, they don't have it. So they got 4.0 when they stay with me. That boy. But before, he never had that kind of grade because he say most of the time his parents abused at work, and when he got back from school, he just play games. And he's smart boy. He even he know how to do homework, but he didn't do that because he's addicted with the games. Right now, I think it's a trend for ourselves, especially if you are educators. You have to raise some kind of curriculums to keep their interest. And sometimes when the children stay at my monastery, I say they can play games, but not violent, not shooting. But especially for the boys, without shooting, without violence, they say it's boring. That's like girl types. You understand that? So how you have to, you can replace that some type of games, just keep their interest, but somehow they want to be more active.
Want to be
More active.
active.
And plus, sometimes the parents, they're so busy, or they just give the games for the children to play so that they have their own times. So that's the problem there. Unless you're parents now, but you want to be soon. How soon? How soon is up to you, but you have to deal. You have to deal with them one way or another, right? So it's tough. Is that right? Tough to raise even a child, right? You can go a couple or two and so forth. It's quite different from the past. So you have to be ready. Otherwise, it's really a lot of heck.
I mean, the standard for entertainment is so high now.
Yeah.
You've got a phone that can make a video that's 1080p. I mean, so how do you compete? And there's got to be a way. It just takes time, I think. You have to build it into the schedule.
They've changed the way TV shows are. Years ago, the amount of time spent on one scene was much longer, and now they're taking scenes and they're making it really small just so that you get that stimulus more and more and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Kids have high expectations.
Yeah. And even when we talk about, let's say the boys play shooting games, do we think that just tell them to accept that shooting game? That's the trend in mind, right? In my training for shooting people when they grown up. So look what happened in Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
So it's not, it's unhealthy. Anyway, I have some video clip about to show you later. You have which number you do?
I did number 7.
Okay, go ahead. What is that?
I have mine up too.
Okay.
I wasn't very mindful when I wrote this, and I forgot the part about ADHD.
Okay.
But I did the depression and negative behaviors.
Okay.
So, I was interested in this one just because, I guess from a psychological standpoint, but also the depression is the leading diagnosis for mental illness in the world. But pertaining to parenting, the article that I read was actually a PhD dissertation by Roland, and I think it's a girl, but the name is spelled like a guy's as well, so I don't know. But so with parenting, and I think we're all aware of like what depression can do, but you get very detached and you kind of focus on yourself, not in like a self-conceited way, but I mean, all your thoughts are about like how I feel and how my life just isn't what I want it to be, and so it really negatively impacts the parent-child interactions because it was saying that there's a trend with depressive parents that they aren't able to attend to the needs of the children, and that stunts their cognitive and social growth. And this is even true whenever the parents go into like a remission of the depression and they're not depressed anymore, because they never learned the skills to develop a healthy interaction with their child. So the negative parenting behaviors still go into the relationship even though the depression's gone. But one of the ways that they've been using to treat it with mindfulness is in VCT that we talked about. The traditional route is to usually use CBT, but they're starting to use mindfulness techniques so that parents become aware of their behaviors towards their children, but not necessarily go in the mindset of having to change those behaviors, because they'll change themselves as they progress and grow. So it's been common for in BCT to be used so that parents understand, like, okay, this is what I'm doing to my child, and this is how things are, and this is how it's affecting them. So they've been using that, and it's actually been like one of the most successful treatments for depression. But they also focus on something called behavioral parent training, which exists to help parents identify negative behaviors and replace them with positive ones. So it's really similar to MBCT. But these two together have been some of the most effective treatments for depression, and then it helps the parent develop that relationship with the child that they never had, so that they can develop cognitively and socially, where they otherwise wouldn't have.
So can you give an example, the reason why the parents or children having that type of some kind of depression in their relationship?
Like an example of why they would have the depression? I mean, there's a lot of social factors, but I mean, depression and mental illness, a lot of it's genetic. So, I mean, it's not uncommon for the child to have it as well. Even if it wasn't genetic, they're growing up with it, and so they're learning how to think that way, and they're seeing it every day. So, it could be biological, social, or it could just be something that they picked up somewhere.
Or behavioral parents training. Can you mention a lot of times in this kind of behavioral parent training, what do they train the parents about?
What I read was that it exists to help parents identify negative parenting behaviors and replace them with positive ones.
It's like CBT, huh?
Yeah.
What else?
Let's see. It says that through this method, parents are able to connect or reconnect with their child. So, I mean, pretty much what I said, there wasn't a lot in it in the article that I read. He didn't focus on that a lot. His focus was maybe on BCG, but he was just mentioning that as the impression I got was this sort of an obscure thing that they're doing. Like, it's not an offered treatment all the time. It just depends on.
Let's say the parents could not guide, especially the teen, right? Teenager, and they feel depressed, right? That they could not guide it. The teen don't want to follow the parents' order or guidance. So it's really causes parents depressed. It's out of my control. I can't control them anymore, right? It's happened to you when you have that teen children. It's happened to you somehow.
I've been depressed around my children.
When you deal with them.
Like when they were teens, did they rebel against you not following?
Oh yeah, they went through a phase, each of them at different times.
Yeah.
One of them had some depression for a little while. He was in a relationship with a girlfriend that wasn't very positive. He struggled with some depression and a lot of anxiety and stuff. Actually, I taught him how to meditate and do yoga at that time because I was taking yoga.
Wow.
And so he started doing meditation to help calm himself. And then he eventually broke up with her. Now yeah. And now he's, he's much more, he was very much withdrawn. Like he would be by himself, and brooding and, stuff like that, and very unhappy, and like prone to fits of rage and just acting crazy. And then once he started meditating, realizing that he didn't have to let how he felt control him, he learned how to manage it. So sometimes he still gets anxiety, but he knows how to manage it now. He also quit taking caffeine. I told him to cut out the caffeine because that wasn't helping. So he did that too. It was a hard time for me, but he got through it.
How about you? Do you have that you got it?
Yeah, about a decade ago, I went through about a year and a half of a really difficult, like, mental struggle. Just kind of decompressing, because I did my bachelor's when my kids were in school. Well, my kids were already born. I didn't go back to school until they were 3, and it took me 6 years to get my bachelor's, and I was trying to take care of my household and my kids, and still go to school full-time and work part-time. So it was a lot of stress for a long period of time, and I just didn't allow myself to be affected by it. So then about a year after, just my whole brain went, I just freaked out for like a year and a half. I was really depressed and really stressed, very unsatisfied with everything. And yeah.
Do medicine or?
Yeah, I tried medicine. It was very bad. It made it much, much worse. Yeah.
Have side effects.
The side effects, and it made me suicidal. It was really, really bad. So I quit taking medicine and then just started trying to deal with it on my own. Just it was more like self-talk, because I didn't know about meditation or yoga or anything at that point, but it's more talking to myself, telling myself it would be okay, trying to be positive.
So this one is training for yoga. Right? We got the future parents, right? So you can be ready to deal with them.
I don't know.
Okay, let's see.
The world has plenty of people in it, so don't feel any pressure.
So first, you have 2 or 3 children?
Yeah.
3 or 2?
3.
3. So when you raise them, you have a lot of problems. It's so stressful to raise them, doing those stuff.
It's interesting. I have dogs as well.
Okay.
They're all dogs. But they all have different personalities. And some have higher level of stress. And some have higher level of stress that they put on me. And I don't know if you guys realize what a gift we have with this course. Because if I had these skills, I don't know how many mistakes I made raising my children. So, yeah,
it's valuable. It's so practical, right? Okay, what do you have?
Myself. Oh, I did number 2.
Yeah, please. What's that?
Okay. What I found mainly deal with kind of the effects that mindfulness has on children with ADHD. That's the majority of it. And I read through a study on where they had the parents and the children practicing mindfulness. And I think this is important because it said that ADHD is hereditary. So I guess if a child is diagnosed with ADHD, it's not unlikely that the parent will have some of the symptoms as well. And I think this could kind of create problems in maybe the parent being able to pay attention to their children's needs and wants, which could really put a stress on the relationship. So basically what this study kind of showed was, well, first off, by the parents practicing mindfulness, it showed that it decreased the inattentiveness of the parents, which, as I kind of pointed to earlier, that I really think, being able to pay attention to your child and their needs is really going to help build a healthy relationship. It also really said it helped reduce parental stress involved in there. I'm not sure if that's because it was the children practicing mindfulness and they're less stressful to deal with, or maybe it's a mixture of the children and the parents doing it as well. Overall, the research did show that by the children and the parents practicing mindfulness, ADHD symptoms have been reduced because of that. Unfortunately, during the study, they also asked the teachers of the children with ADHD, and they didn't rate, when they asked if they saw a reduction in ADHD symptoms, they really didn't rate it as much of a reduction as did the parents. So this could point to a bias, with the parents there and, rating a reduction there. All in all, I guess it has been shown that it has reduced ADHD symptoms in children. However, there was a lot of factors out of control of the research itself, as in, the parents obviously, when they said it was being reduced, they obviously had a bias in that, and also we don't know if it's whether because the children practice mindfulness or the parents or a combination of the both. So I think there still needs to be more research to really determine the precise effects of mindfulness.
It's interesting that ADHD, the diagnosis is vastly increased in recent years. I don't know if that's with video games or whatever. And also it's interesting that the South has a higher rate diagnosis of ADHD versus the rest of the country. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but in my opinion, I think ADHD isn't necessarily always ADHD.
Where was the source?
I'm sorry?
I've never heard that it was higher in the South.
It was a TED Talk.
So probably nowadays so much destruction, right?
I didn't even know that there was something called, like there was that acronym we learned about.
ADT, right? That's something called ADT.
It was like ADHD symptoms for people, like people had the symptoms, but it was like based on their environment. There is something separate. And I've been tested for ADHD, and I know that some processes for figuring out whether or not somebody has it. Some are like others, and sometimes doctors don't spend that much time because they can't figure it out. So maybe there are a lot of people being diagnosed that just have the characteristics of it, but it's not genetic.
Yeah.
Like it's based on the environment. However, I take medication for it. Like I've taken medication for depression and ADHD, and I've never had a problem. It just varies, but I also implement meditation and things like that.
So you're still taking the medicine?
No, I take medicine for both every day. I mean, a low dosage, and I meditate, I exercise, I try to. I mean, I try to do every day.
So I think it was besides the generate problem, so we get from parents, right? The environment affect to our mind too. So like I just said, is we have too much destruction. Right? Games, yes, sir.
Well, I just wanted to say that last 2 semesters ago in my normal psychology class, we talked about how there's a lot of politics in diagnosing, and ADHD and ADD get overdiagnosed a lot because they have to meet a quota. And it's one of the easier one for the pharmaceutical companies to keep the money going towards the drugs.
Oh, really?
And so, because the symptoms, they can fit a lot of disorders, that they can diagnose it without really looking into what kind of illness it really is.
They don't do studies on it.
Right, and so they'll overdiagnose it, especially in children, because it's easy, and because it's a lot harder to diagnose children, so they'll just give it to them and be like, well, you have ADHD. And that way we meet our quota, and we get you on medication, so everybody's happy. Even though that's not what really the problem is. But there's just a lot of politics in it and money. And we don't even have, like, the DSM isn't structured well enough to give accurate diagnoses in a lot of disorders. Like, we need to really fix the DSM or get something new, because it's not a good, it's what we have, but it's not the best tool we have for diagnosing. And so people are getting overdiagnosed and misdiagnosed for money. And so that's probably accounting for a lot of why the medication is not working for children.
So do you think, like, the statistics on the websites, like, I can't remember the exact name of the website, but it's the website for, like, the Association for Adults and Children with ADHD, and it comes out with all of the research on these topics and stuff, and that's where I get my sources, because I know that's where my ed sci professor gets his sources, and that's where my doctor but I do wonder. I mean, I don't have time to look at it as in depth as I would like to or try to, but some like they come out with things that like there was a huge cross-sectional study that was taken into account with like 100 other cross-sectional studies from all around the world showing like that when people actually do have it, that it's not environmental and all these things, and that really like there is no difference that they probably are taking into account. They're probably averaging these things based on certain characteristics that I don't think is explained. So it's hard. Like I'm interested if you guys talk about that in your psychology classes, how to know what good research is.
Well, I would say that the sources you look at, they're, in their mind, those are accurate, but they're only getting the information from the physicians. You know, they're only taking the statistics that, well, they did diagnose this. They can't prove whether it was an accurate diagnosis. So the sources' statistics are probably correct in themselves, but they might not be correct in reality, if that makes sense.
So you'd have to look at studies that maybe didn't just take into account what physicians said. Are they?
I don't know.
We could talk about this.
Especially when you take into consideration how much time a physician actually spends with you when you go. You know,
like
you might get 10 minutes in the room with a physician.
when I tested, it was like a 2-week process. I needed to be like 6 hours for one day, 6 hours another day, and to test
That's
like
amazing.
everything else. It was a really long process.
Well, that's good. That would make me feel reassured. Just the fact that it was an intense and in-depth testing process. When you go in a room, like whenever I was put on medication for depression, I talked to her for like 10 minutes. She didn't even ask what other medicines I took. You know? And I was so spun out mentally, I didn't think to ask either. It was just,
Who will see your physician?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was seeing my physician for those kinds of medications when I was switched to a psychiatrist because I realized like she didn't, like she admitted to me that she just didn't have the background to know which things would be better like other things, like in terms of medication. She wasn't there because that was the background.
I also think that it's kind of an easy way out for parents and or teachers if they're having trouble with a student and no one's taking real time to be mindful at all. And I just know this from one personal experience. For example, when I was a young adult, I rented a room from a family, and the second I would go in from home, it was like chaos in the house. The TV was as loud as it could be so that the parents could hear it over the children. And the children were screaming as loud as they could, all three of them, to be heard over the TV. And it went on like that from the time like everyone got home until bedtime, like 11 o'clock at night. So how are kids doing homework when there's just constant chaos? I mean, kids would be taking a bath and they could be drowning, nobody would know, nobody could hear them. I mean, it was constant chaos. And one of the girls had bad grades and their answer was put her on Ritalin. That's going to fix it. And I'm like, maybe you could turn off the TV and sit down and do homework with her for an hour every night. That might help her grades just a little, you know? But like nobody even thought to take 5 minutes out and just sit down and be quiet, turn off the TV, not even while they were eating. It was just constant chaos.
That's why.
I never thought she needed medication at all. And she just kind of turned into a zombie child after that. So I think she's fine now, but.
Yeah, like you say, sometimes parents may think that, okay, they have a problem here, they get that medicine. It's just, they can feel better so that they can do their own work.
And the parents can experience a lot of pressure from the teachers. Because I have twin boys, and one of them has always been a little more rambunctious than the other. He's just aggressive, and I mean, not now, but as a child, aggressive. He's still a little aggravating, just always push at his brother, trying to get attention. You know, climbing trees, running around, wild child. But if it came to something he's interested in, he'll sit right down and focus. You know, if he likes it, he can focus if he wants to. You know, if it's something he's interested in, he can focus. But because he didn't have a lot of good relations with some of the teachers at school. Some of them, if they were nice to him, he would be good for them. But if they were cranky or whatever, instantly he'd just start acting out. And then him and the teacher were like this. One particular year, he had a particularly bad teacher. And him and her fought the whole year, and I had to fight with her and the principal the whole year. And at one point during that year, I was literally by myself in a room with 8 people in that school. And the principal and some medical health professional, all of them telling me I had to put my kid on Ritalin. And I was like, oh, no, I'm not. And I'm like, oh, do you have any other suggestions? Do you offer tutoring? Do you offer, whatever? Well, I had like a list of questions. Nobody had any other suggestion besides putting my kid on drugs. And I'm like, okay, since there are 8 professionals in this room and none of you have any suggestions besides drugs, I think I'll just decline and you guys can deal with my kid and, have fun because I'm doing what I can with him at home. I spend time with him, And then they would like make him. They cut the PE classes because of the No Child Left Behind. No more PE. So we're talking about a 2nd grade student. Okay, they have to sit in the same classroom all day, no PE, and then they cut recesses down to 15 minutes. Okay, that's it. 2 15-minute recesses in an 8-hour day for like an 8-year-old boy who's really active, no PE. Well, of course he's going to jump around and be obnoxious in class. He's bored. He can't sit still that long. Well, so when he would misbehave, they would take away his recess, his only physical activity, and make him write sentences. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many times I went down at school, you will not make my son write sentences. Every time I said, they make you write sentences, they take away your recess, you tell me. So I made them, and I mean literally me and my husband had to go down to school every day for like 6 weeks, fighting with these teachers. And we said, if he is misbehaving, he can walk that line, there's a big line. Instead of playing with his friends, if you feel he has to be punished, he will walk that line. He will not write sentences. He will not be sat in a chair. He will be walking the line, because at least he's burning calories. He's doing something. I mean, how? It's so ridiculous that they would take a child with excess energy and try to make him sit still during recess. I'm like, what is wrong with you people?
I think it goes back to hearing thing about politics. Because the South is less healthy. You just look at people and tell you're less healthy. Well, probably less healthy politics. The two-credit economy. And in schools, you say the less time kids have to run around, more behavior go through the roof. My wife's a counselor over in Mount Tabor. She comes home, her perception of school versus now is radically different. She thinks all the kids were going to help. And I think it has a lot to do with what you're saying. Because politics, health, I think you're right about control.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing to that? I mean, it's really interesting too if you look at it in a historical context. I mean, especially in the South. I mean, in the 20s and 30s, people were raising kids for the purpose of actually extra farm laborers or farmhands to go out and till the land and be basically like help. I mean, especially in the South. So, and then as as we've progressed since then, I mean, the 50s and 60s, you've got like the ad explosion, marketing, consumerism goes crazy. So it's almost like to what extent does children's roles change as we develop as a society? I mean, I wonder in 20 years, 30 years, what kind of relationships children are going to have with not only their direct physical environment, but with their own families and school. I mean, it's just, it all ties together.
Yeah, I was reading a book about, it was looking at the past and looking at different wars and the people who were, I don't know, they talked about different case studies of people who were more likely to go off to war and people who were more likely to be active in certain activities, and they were saying like these, it was talking about people who shared characteristics of people with ADHD today, and they were aware of that at the time, but back then, like, they didn't have medication, they didn't think to put them on medication. What they would just do was, like, if you had a more active kid, you let them go and they were more active. And a lot of people who had those characteristics of ADHD typically were in the Army and typically were doing some, just more involved.
I think if they would have had that as a diagnosis when I was a kid, I would have been considered ADHD. I can't sit still.
A lot of people think Jefferson had autism. I mean, all these people who have mental disabilities.
Let's move on.
Okay. Well, again, I actually don't think I did the right one, but so I said I would do one, and then by the time I got around to like doing it, I forgot one.
That's okay.
So. Again, I gotta start writing it down. Jacob was telling me to start writing it down, and I told him that I would remember it. And laughed about it. But anyway, I wrote about 3, like how to teach mindfulness, and like it can be hard to like explain to children what mindfulness is. Like you try to sit in this class and explain to them how we learn it, it just wouldn't go over very well, I don't think. So it says Dr. Amy Saltzman says that she first asked the child to participate in mindful activity, and then once they have the experience, then try to explain what it is and the purpose, and then they go from there. And it's just like kind of making it a little more elementary, I guess, for children, and have them focus on their breaths, and then in between, like focusing on breath and whatnot, have them think about the present moment and how they're feeling, and then they can it seems like they kind of chop it up a little bit to keep them engaged, not just like a prolonged amount of time of just sitting and focusing on one thing. We like to break it up a little bit. And so, as we've talked about, it's really helpful for children with ADHD, autism, depression, anxiety, things like that. And each child can be taught a different way depending on how, what works best for them. And then I also wrote a little bit about teenagers, because I can remember not accepting the way that I was changing in my teenage years, and having a lot of attention drawn to that particular period of time. I mean, if you're not, it's petty, but if you're not wearing the right thing, if you're not, wearing deodorant all the time, new things, people are mean, there's a lot of new changes, and a lot of teenagers aren't equipped with the knowledge on how to best handle that stress. And I mean, things seem goofy now, but it was a big thing, and I think if we were to teach them, and help them learn meditation on how to reduce the stress and be more self-aware and more, acceptance of themselves, a lot of depression and anxiety would leave. And so, I mean, I also talked about how mindfulness can be taught privately with at home, or in a counseling situation, or if it was added to a school curriculum, how that would be helpful, just because it would be, you could, I just think it'd be a nice time. I feel like school settings sometimes get a little tense. I mean, if the teacher, you're not supposed to take your stuff to work, but if you're stressed out at home and you come to work and your students aren't behaving how you would like to, I think just a small amount of time spent on mindfulness and meditation would kind of neutralize everything and make it easier for everyone to learn. That's what I wrote about.
You ever deal with the children?
I try to avoid children. I mean, they're nice and all. I'm really
distance.
But I did work as a teacher's aide for a while, but it was 2nd grade. So 2nd grade, that's a good age group. They're actively, they can tell you what they want and need, and a lot of times I would take some of the students that were having trouble with their math or their reading, and just go and do activities that would help them focus on that. And it really seemed to help them, because I'd grade their papers too. So before I would take them and help them, the grade would be lower, and then after individualized help, it would go up. I mean, that's a proven thing. But I mean, it was just nice to see the taking away from a fast-paced, higher stress situation, and focusing on one thing can really help them out. So I mean, I work more with college students if I'm RA, but they're a whole other animal.
Yeah, when we talk about how to use mindfulness in college, this one, some articles just talk about, especially the children at the young age. It's easy to get into meditation because they have what we call, remember, in one of the techniques is mentioned about, or actually the seven, remember the 7 attitudes of the MBSR. One of them is to have the inner mind, remember? For the children, it's easy. Look at the way they eat. Look at the way they play toys. They look cute with their curiosity. They have fresh mind. They don't have any kind of hidden agenda to look at things. Is that right? So they look at things in a pure way. So in a way that it's easy for us to guide them, so that they can, let's say, when we talk, like you mentioned, the teachers may give them some kind of activities before leading them to do meditation or mindfulness. Before we enter, I have to show you. But anyway, so if you work with the children, it's a thought. And even for me, my own experience, I can teach any child to do meditation. Of course, as much as I can sit. As the time that I ask them to close the eyes, that's the time they can calm their mind. And of course, they can count their breath, but sometimes it's hard. But some what I use body scan. They just ask them to lie out there and to feel about the body. Even they may not recognize a feeling with their body or emotion, because probably they're too young to recognize. So I give them some kind of what we call imagination. Go down to the space to ride on the spaceship and so forth, so that they can live up. I mean, they can follow that kind of instruction to have the kind of mindfulness instead of playing around with their thought. So again, for the young age children, it's not hard for us, because as much as we give them some kind of concrete guideline, they would have the kind of inner mind. That's the advantage, and encourage mind to find more things. So I will show you after this. Okay, let's see if we can play.
I don't have a lot.
Let's play. Which number you working on?
What?
You work on your office.
Yes, I worked on number 5.
Okay.
And I read an article and I have a little bit of notes on aggression, and stress, but I really didn't get a chance to go over enough. So I don't know if I can apply it to MBSR and NCT workshop.
Okay.
So aggression. I learned a tool called meditation on the soles of your feet.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that would be considered an MBSR technique or an MCT technique or just a mindfulness technique.
That's the modification.
It's just not in behavior modification, so that's MCT.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is for young people who deal with aggression a lot and anger. And the way it works is the person, adult dealing with anger will sit, stand, whatever, let angry thoughts flow naturally without restriction. That's interesting. Stand in neutral rather than stand or sit in neutral rather than aggressive posture. put your mind in the place where your anger originated. Let your mind stay there. I don't know if this means you dwell on your anger, but you recognize where it originated.
It's not easy.
It's not. No, it's
when
not.
you're angry, right?
Sometimes
So what do
I,
you
it
recognize?
takes like days for me to figure
Yeah,
out why I got
after that
angry.
event happening, right?
Because there's the primary and the secondary
Yeah.
emotions, and it's like a line. It's really
Yeah.
difficult. So sometimes it takes a while. So you stand there and you figure out where the anger originated, and then you stay there, and then you shift all of your attention to the soles of your feet, and be mindful while thinking about your feet and your toes and how they feel, and just have mindfulness walking and mindfulness dishwashing. And just focus on what your feet feel like, and I'm guessing you focus you take that anger and sounds like you're placing it on your feet. Either way, you just focus on that. So keep breathing naturally and focus on the soles of your feet until you feel calm. Meditate on the soles of your feet for 10 to 15 minutes, and then slowly come out of your meditation and resume your daily activities. And this has worked for many people, many people who deal with depression. And that's something I took from the articles about trees that I read.
Yeah, I use to advise people if they have a headache, just stand up and focus your mind on your feet.
Why on your feet? Is it
Because that's the way you release you release all the tension down there. So it should be helpful. Of course, if you have anger, anxiety, I think, especially anger too, you can have the kind of releasing energy.
To just like maybe picture your emotions just going down and then all going out your feet.
Or taking a shower. Remember I told you when taking a shower, water could not stay with you or stay with you on the top. So we need to flow down. So this is a way you let go of your emotion, focus and anxiety, worriness. So it's plenty. Yes.
Just a quick tip, for a potential teacher, you might want to look up conscious discipline. So used in elementary schools.
conscious discipline is something used in schools?
It's all elementary schools use, or the elementary schools use conscious discipline.
Unconscious or conscious?
Conscious.
Conscious. I will.
Okay, so let's just you are the last one, and after that we go over this one. What was which number?
Number 9.
Number 9. Okay.
So the article that I read, it was a general study of mindfulness in children and young adults, and they looked at multiple techniques like MBSR, MBCT, ACT, DBT, and they combined a lot of the mindful techniques with physical activities like walking meditation, mindful eating, body scan, yoga, Tai Chi, because children have a harder time sitting still, and adults have shorter attention spans. So physically giving them something to do. Oh, and visualization. We were talking about imagining a spaceship. That helps because it helps them focus on something singular rather than all the chaos that could be going on in their minds, and helps them focus. They did studies in all different age groups, from like 2 years old to 12 years old, and then also young adults. They found that there were changes in not only emotional externalization of like emotional disorders like anxiety or stress or anger, but also physical symptoms for kids with like gastroesophageal reflux and kids with eating disorders who were too heavy. Like they helped them with mindful eating and mindful walking, and they were able to reduce their weight without getting worse disorder, becoming anorexic, or being stressed about, their body image. It was helpful for them to be able to lose weight without getting a negative body image, which was good. One of the things I thought was interesting was they talked that, training for teachers and parents is definitely helpful to, get everyone on the same page is the most effective. But even when they did these studies with just the kids, it helped the kids still. Not as much as the teachers and the parents and everybody knows what's going on and everybody's trying to be mindful. That's the ideal situation. But even when the kids are on their own being mindful, they still experience benefit. The way they externalize less is because they're reducing their symptoms, so there's less to externalize, and they're learning mind control, which helps them to control their reactions to their feelings, reactions to their emotions, and reactions to the symptoms, so that reduces externalization as well. One thing I thought about the yoga and the Tai Chi part, my children have been doing, my adult children are doing jujitsu, and they've been doing it for 3 years. And it's for, they started with wrestling in school, and then they switched to jujitsu because the school was not sanitary with their mats, and they kept getting different funguses and bacteria. It was quite disgusting. Yeah, oh yeah. So they decided to quit the wrestling team because they're very clean people and they can't handle, like germs really bother them. So they just said they weren't going to wrestle anymore, but they were missing the activity of it. And they were never into the competitive sports or the rah-rah go team. They were never into that, but they were always into the active part, right? They've always liked to like fight and wrestle, but they're just aggressive by nature. But the jiu-jitsu is different, and then the whole mindset is different than like the wrestling mindset. They said that when they were on a wrestling team, when somebody was new, it was like smash them until they, learn who's in charge and they can stand up for themselves. And, a lot of kids would just leave because it was so aggressive when they first came in the door. Well, once you prove yourself, then you're accepted, right? It's kind of like hazing type thing. But with jiu-jitsu, it's the reverse. It's everyone comes in at a different level, and everyone is there to learn from each other. Even the people who've been doing it a long time can learn from somebody new, and the people who've been doing it a long time can share with their knowledge. And there's a knowledge sharing, which is a natural team building thing. They all felt like closer as a team right away, and like smashing someone and overpowering somebody with strength is the opposite. You don't do that with jiu-jitsu. It's all about strategy and about timing and like reflex and leverage and things like that. So it's more about, you have to really use your mind, and you have to be really mindful and think really closely about what you're doing, because your goal is not really to hurt that person. It's just to get you to a point where they know they have to stop, and they'll tap. And as soon as they say submit and you let go, so you're not trying to hurt them. You're just trying to put them in a position where they will stop before they get hurt, and that's how you win. So it's you're not in a position where you're trying to hurt someone, and then they learn from each other. And then, like, each of them will learn the other's tricks, and then they have to learn new stuff. So, the whole mindset, I can see how, because they have to be really mindful, and I can see how yoga, Tai Chi, Jiu-Jitsu, things like that, where you have to be mindful of what you're doing. If you incorporate mindfulness in that, then it can be really helpful for a child to deal with any kind of disorder, because it's thoughtful, and it's more strategy than it is, like, aggressive.
So we have a lot to thank you. So we talk about mindfulness is God too. Next time. So we have a lot to go over, but let me go more of the disciplines. Most of them that you have discussed already, I want to add more. So like you say, behavioral parent training, you mentioned that replace innate thought with the parts they want to learn. And what they call here ATP, automated transactional procedure. This is when you recognize this word mean, we follow with what we call autopilot in the daily life. So in the mindfulness training, yes, you know that. We reverse. And here, MBPT, mindfulness-based parents training. You need to have this kind of training before you have children. Okay, so they list out 3 steps
for you to handle, to you to have this kind of training. First one is facilitate active listening. Listen without judging, without criticizing. Okay, listen. It's not easy, right? So somehow the parents' attitude is quite different from friends and friends. Parents and children attitude is different from friends and friends. You can listen to your friends, but sometimes you may not listen, may not like to listen to the children because you may think they're too young to understand. They're immature to talk to you, right? So that's why here, but if we just listen, as a parent, whoever, even remember we talk about leadership skill, to listen without judging, without criticism. Sometimes it's not easy for the parent to sit down and talk with the children because whenever we recognize they talk in a childish way, right? We will stop them on the spot. No, it's not understand. Right? For example, I deal with some boys, and they say, well, like you mentioned recently that they like to play with the shooting games, violent games, and they told them, no, it's unhealthy for you guys. Because when you guys grown up, if you have a real gun on your hand, you may shoot people easily because you train yourself already. You say, no, that's for fun. And they said that they don't have any games, the active games, like this kind of violence, this kind of shooting and so forth. And I told them this is one girls in the room, I showed them, that's kind of game you can play. That's the girls' games I want to play with. You see that? So my point is that sometimes we need to understand their mentality. We need to recognize what they need. Otherwise, if we criticize on the spot, we would not listen. Of course, like you said, we may need to play some type of game, but nowadays, especially for the children, they may be tired after school, right? So they like to do things instead of educational games like math, English, and so forth, right? But so far, sometimes for us too, sometimes we like to watch some kind of movies, play something else instead of doing the work again in school because it's too much already. So we need to understand that kind of mentality. And yes, so it's not easy. It's not easy as a teacher, as a leaders, as parents to listen to our children, to listen to our employees, to listen to whoever follows us without criticizing, without judging them. It's not easy. We have to hold that. We have to have that kind of patience. We have that virtue. And listening again is simple, right? You need to listen out loud and learn from behavior. Remember, whenever we think something, we say, "Oh, this is mine." But when we listen ourselves from that thought. We have times to recognize this is the thought. Otherwise, we will play with them. We will follow that thought. And that's what here. The last one is what called MAP, motivated action plans. That's mean what is mean for the parents. Let's say if they know anytime that they sit down to talk with their children, or even in the leadership skill too, even in the teacher too. Anytime we sit down with our students, with our children, and so on, we may, if they talk nonsense, for example, right? The children sometimes they talk nonsense, so we could not be patient with them. We have that simple anger in our mind. So what is the MAP here, motivated action plan is to that we remind ourselves to calm down, to just listen there, to just sit down and listen there. That's just what we call the MAP. That's just the pre-planning, how to deal with this type of situation, hard situation. Yeah. And so that's just in some of these articles, just talk about this one here. And the last one is what we call the activate therapies, especially if you deal with the adolescent sexual
aggression here. And let me show. 8. Can you see this? Can you see mode deactivation? That means whenever they have individual therapists, whenever they have that kind of aggressive attitude, you tell them to recognize the next, validate and acceptance, validate radical acceptance. Even they have that aggressive thought. So they can recognize us, even if weird, it's so radical. This is sometimes is irrational too, and you have to you train them, tell them to be mindful with that kind of thought, cognitive balances. So this is what we call mode the activation therapies. So the point is to even they have the real wild thought about sexual aggression, but the therapist can tell them, you accept that, recognize us, especially, and let's go through. So that's not easy because when they use different techniques, maybe not applicable for this type of children, this type of teenager. So that's why they use this approach, what we call the mode deactivation. So basically, they release, they recognize their wild thought and release them in a mindful way. So it's not easy. So that's just one of the approach. Okay, let's me show you these 2 video clips that have the children.
In the Mind Up curriculum, there is what's called the core practice. In the core practice, 3 times a day, you do a breathing exercise with the kids. This was maybe the lesson that the teachers were the most anxious about, but now that we've been doing it, I think the teachers have found that it's one of the best parts of the curriculum.
I think it's also just because the kids are getting ready for the day, getting ready for what they're going to learn, so they have to have their brain relaxed.
I've even found myself a couple of times saying, okay, I need to bring the energy level down because we're moving from, say, math to science or science to writing or something, and they're all like, you know, even when it's not a scheduled time to breathe. Okay, let's sit down, let's breathe. Okay, guys. Focus on your breathing.
What happens is you can start extending the time between the 2 chimes, so the breathing breaks can get a little bit longer.
You can just close your eyes and breathe.
Okay, another one here.
Feel the breath coming in, feel the breath going out. The mind wanders away and becomes distracted, just noticing that, and then coming back to the breath. Feeling the whole body resting. So it's fine for me to talk about this just now, but when you experience a strong emotion, stress or anxiety or fear or anger, you need to be able to, in that moment, say, I feel my breath, I feel my chest, okay, come down and breathe down in the belly, right? And it's such a valuable ability, okay, to be able to know, because then we're not pulled along by thoughts and emotions, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to play musical statues. Alright? Well, with mindful musical statues, we can stop. Not only do you have to be completely still and quiet, but also your attention has to come down to your breath, okay? Practice in an instant, straight away. Bring the mind down to the belly, okay? Amy, remember, is Layla's anger, okay? Amy is Layla's anger, okay? Now what I want you to do is walk Layla around the class. Just you're in control. You just direct her about. Just put her anywhere, okay? Go for it. Go for it. Right? Okay? Right? Come back onto your shoulders. Okay? Move her around a bit more. Okay? Now stop a minute. Let me ask you guys, who is in control of Layla here? Layla's anger is in control, isn't it? See that? Just turn around and look at Amy. Okay? And I want you to say, I see you, anger. Right, who's in control of Layla now? Layla, okay? When we're able to turn around and notice, I see this anger, I see that I'm experiencing this just now. When we notice that this is an emotion, we create some space for ourselves, okay? We come down to breath, and then we turn to mind and say, I've noticed that there's anger just now. I noticed that there's sadness, I noticed this fear. We create a better space and we have more control. Okay?
Okay, so this Nancy there, you see Nancy will tell you is it the teacher. Next few years, next couple of years, hopefully. Okay, so next Monday I won't be here, and Miss Tabitha, right? Okay, and she will be what do you call facilitated? And this is a question. So I think if you can, here you can use any model, especially any model to resolve the conflict: husband, wife, parents, children, employers, managers, supervisor with employees, owner with customer, teacher, professors, student, and so forth. This whole list, you can use any models. Okay? And we'll be back next Wednesday. Alright, so thank you. And it's good preparation for you guys. That's 2 years from now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll put around
So we're going to calculate about it.
I don't blame you. I
Thank you. See you.
Kind of do a it's too like to drop it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
It was nice. Alright, see ya.
I know, but it, I mean, you know, it has to be so different. Our parents would have just, you know, or for a little bit. I don't do it for you. Yeah. Get some sleep. See you Wednesday.
So you go to teach in high school level?
Yes.
Alright, so